The following is a full-length video from one of the modules in my online course in the coaching and cueing section. If you enjoy the video and you want to learn more about my online course, check the link in the description. I hope that you enjoy.
Okay, so with raising type motions, we're talking cables now. Dumbbells are also a great option. The only issue with dumbbells is much like in triceps, biceps based motions, you have to really be careful about how you manipulate the dumbbell relative to your body, or else at certain points you may be loading certain things that are potentially problematic for the person, right? So if I have a dumbbell, right, there's obviously very little load in a raise at the bottom and there's a shit ton of load at the top. And somewhere in between there may be a little bit of a path of motion thing that's slightly sort of out of whack. Maybe they're rotating more, maybe they're rotating less. A lot of that tends to get solved with the beauty of cables, right? So the beauty of cables is that we can change this load direction to however we want. And if I set myself up in a sort of position where maybe, the cable is pulling me more across my body, I can pull up and out this way. I can load it, behind my body and load it up and out this way. I can do the classic crotch lateral and put it somewhere in between. Regardless, the cable is going to basically follow my arm in the plane of motion that my arm wants to move. So Audrey is going to grab the cable here and we're going to go over a few basic cues, and let's, just pick a Y raise or something like that. All of these are very similar. And I want you to face the camera there so the camera can see you at this angle. So from a setup perspective, I like to kind of have it a little bit heavier toward the bottom, but not that heavy. So what I'll do is I'll put it here so that there's a little bit of a discrepancy in that 90-degree angle. And as Audrey goes up and out to kind of raise, she doesn't want to think about too many things other than simply just moving in the direction that the cable is pulling her. And outside of that, not much else is occurring. From a profile perspective, this is an awesome exercise just because she's going to be stronger more toward the bottom mid-range and she's going to be weaker toward the top. Something that tends to happen a lot with this is people tend to forget that there's a path of motion that starts out here, right? So there's outward motion from here to here, and then from here upward, it's more of a backward type motion. Right, so in the beginning of the motion, Audrey might be thinking out to the side, and then at the end of the motion, Audrey might be thinking back toward the wall. And so go through a rep and maybe think about that intent. And it's getting heavier, so self-assist, nice. And toward the top again, she's thinking more back this way. So again, if I remove this cable, let go. If I remove this cable and I'm thinking about plane of motion, path of motion, whether I'm more into out this way or I'm more sort of back to front this way, it's always going to be, okay, where am I in the arc and what am I trying to do at that portion of the arc? So the profile of the cable cares nothing as far as like, path of motion, arc of motion. It doesn't really care about where our arm is. It's just trying to pull us in the same direction the whole time. The profile will change because there's an arc of motion, but the arc of motion in terms of where you are cueing the person to move has nothing to do with the profile, right? So it could be really light in the bottom. I'm still going to have her think away. It could be very light at the top and I'm still going to have her think back. So profile, don't get confused with path of motion and arc of motion, right? Just think about it from the perspective of, okay, if I'm lower here, I'm moving out this way or I'm moving out this way. And then as I approach the top, it's like, okay, maybe I'm moving more up and then I'm finally moving back, right? What you'll start to see weird stuff happening is like, if the load is too heavy, which for you was a little bit too heavy there, or the intent to move in a particular direction is not there, weird stuff will start to happen with the torso. So a lot of people will start out, maybe they're fine here, but almost immediately it's like they're cranking their body back this way, either again because the load is too heavy or because they're not starting to think backward here, they're starting to think forward, and what will continue to pull them forward is their torso moving in that direction, right? So again, the load direction and the arc of motion thing, that's really, really, really important stuff to continue to revisit in terms of not just like your general understanding of how arcs change and how tangents function, but also from the perspective of each individual motion, what is the arc of motion within this whole thing? And then what might I do to actually cue my client in a little bit of a more appropriate way relative to that thing? So in this instance, it makes a lot of sense for Audrey to be thinking outward, and it makes a lot of sense for her to be thinking forward. But those are two different words. So outward is this way and forward is this way. Both of these things were arcs, right? But maybe the way she was sort of internalizing those cues may be, slightly different, right? If her hand were here and I wanted her to move forward, but I said outward, she might move in this direction or somewhere that I didn't want her to move. So again, the arc sort of, again, relative to maybe where it makes more sense to cue this person in terms of the actual words you use, can be very different from motion to motion and person to person. But that's pretty much it for raises, not too complicated. I went over raises in the cable section. A lot of those things apply directly here. Again, it's all just sort of path of motion in low direction, making sure those things are clear and square first, and then sort of layering on any sort of additional verbal cue or internal cue if it's necessary, and only if it's necessary.